Hello. Environment variables are very essential for keeping our secrets and tokens safe from anyone who's viewing our code, especially in open source projects where you are hosting your code on platforms such as GitHub and everyone can see your code. In that case, it becomes very important to protect your secret tokens or secret keys, such as keys for your S3 or probably your AWS access token or whatnot. So, yeah, environment variables are very important. But one of the problems with using process.env in any project, whether that be a client facing project, that is a front end project, or a back end project, the problem is that those variables are not very type safe. That is, any process.env variable that you're using is not type safe inherently. You're not sure whether it actually exists or not. So in this video, we'll be covering how you can use a basic validator such as Zord or whatever validator it is that you prefer, and combine that with the process.env variable to produce a schema that ensures that your process.env variables, that is your environment variables, are type safe. Now, by default, environment variables can only be of the type string and only of the type string. That is, you can't have booleans or numbers inside an environment variable file. They'll all be converted down to a string. So in the first example, that is our basic example, where we'll be using only a validator and the global types to extend our schema and then use that in our project, we'll only be able to use string types. But later we'll be looking at an open source project created by the T3 folks who have created a very type safe environment variable checker. We'll be looking at how we can integrate that inside our Next.js project. But keep in mind that the library is framework agnostic. That is, you can use it inside any project. Right. Enough talk. Let's get into code. Right. So first up, we'll be starting by scaffolding a project using create next app. Now I'm taking this example inside a Next.js project because it'll be very easy for me to demonstrate how server and client side environment variables can be handled later in the video. And know that I'm also using PNPM as my package manager. Right, so this is how our project is currently looking like. I'll just run the development script now. There's just a single development script, to be honest. I don't know why I said scripts. Localhost 3000. Great. Well, we'll not be working much with the UI anyways, so let's get rid of all the UI things that are currently in the project. Alright, so after resetting everything, this is how the home page looks like. Justin, hi. Let's see how we'll be accessing environment variables using the normal vanilla style. Let's name it key and give it the value of 12. And I want text to be hello world. Now, how can I use this inside my Next.js project? So that's very easy. I'll just go over here and I'll run process.env. And as you can see over here, I'm not getting any type check or any auto completion. That is the best feature of TypeScript, right? Where you get super auto completion on anything that you're using because of the type safety that TypeScript provides. So it already knows the types of whatever it is that you're using. Now, because in this case, the process.env does not know what is inside an environment variables file, it cannot help us in that case. So we'll have to go in blind. We'll have to open our env file and probably rely manually on our memory. We have probably given a key of the name key. Similarly with the text. So now after using our environment variables, let's see how it's reflecting on our 3000. Perfect. 12 and hello world. But then again, in this case, we are not sure if key actually exists or text actually exists. Now, since we are in our local environment and we can play around with whatever we want, we can very quickly iterate and find out that probably key does not exist. But what about when you're inside a complex workflow? Or what if you've pushed your code to build on Vercel or whatever it is that you're hosting your code, and your code build fails, or probably your code is built but then it fails on runtime when user is trying to access something, but then that requires a special environment variable that probably is not inside your environment variable file. That is where the problems start. So we basically need two things. One, is that whenever we are inside local development, we should get a runtime error at that very instant when we're using the file, when we're using the variable, that it does not exist in your environment file. And second is that it should fail on build. Now, failing on build is something a little more complicated, so we'll be covering that in the later section of the video. But let's focus on how we can tackle the first part. That is, how can we make sure that on runtime we get the right environment variables with the right types. So for that, there's a very simple code that Matt Pocock had written, and we'll be using exactly that. So for that, we'll be needing a validator, and that's it. So I'll just bring that code over and install all the dependencies. So the first dependency that you need is, of course, Zord. That's the only dependency you need for now. Okay, so what I've done so far is that I've created an env.ts file in the root of my project, and that has an environment variable constant, which is a Zord object. And this Zord object contains all the environment variables that I currently have. That is the key and the text. Now, of course, we know that key is a number, but then we cannot have number over here right now because the environment variable type only accepts string. We'll see that later. So what I can do is that before parsing anything, I'll run the environment variable.parse. And once this has been set, once this is passing, what I'll do is that inside the global variable and in the Node.js namespace, there is the process env interface, which is the interface that we want to extend with our environment variables. So we'll be extending it with the type of our environment variables. That is the constant that we had created before. Now this should probably help us in some way. Let's see how it helps us. So now whenever you try to access the env, that is the environment variable inside your project, you'll be getting some kind of auto completion. That is, the key is something and the text is something. So you're getting 100% auto completion over here, which is great. And this works out pretty well in basic conditions, like in this case. Alright, now that we have seen how we can use environment variables on a server-side component, that was our page.tsx, we'll be seeing how we can use the same logic on a client-side component. So what I've done is that I've created a basic client component, which will be using the process.env text. That is the text environment variable. And I've imported it inside my server component. But this will probably cause a problem. Do you know why? So you saw that initial flash over there? Hello world. Well, the reason for this is that initially this component was rendered on the server side. And in that case, it had access to the environment variable. But when we have shifted to the client side, then it didn't have access to the environment variable anymore. And because we cannot access any environment variable on the client side on a Next.js project, what we need to do is that we need to preface this with a next public key. Now, if we use the next public text, that is the text environment variable prefaced with a next public prefix, then we'll be able to use this on the client side now. Yeah, let's see now. Before that, we'll have to update the text over here to next public. We'll have to update it to next public text. And then similarly use that over here. But over here, since process.env, that is the environment variable key, or the environment variable object, accepts any key, because there can be anything inside your environment file, right? So over here, it is accepting the text and not throwing any error. Now after reloading, client hello world is clearly visible. There is no error thrown because we prefixed it with the next public key that is required to access environment variables on the client side. But this solution of using environment variables and parsing them and then extending the interface process env with our validated types is not perfect. Now the problem with using a simplistic approach, that is only having a Zord validator or any validator, is that you won't be able to transform your data, since the process.env is not actually changed, but you're just validating it using a Zord parse and not actually using the process.env. You could argue that you can actually use the env variables constant and export it and then use it across your project. But that presents you with a different challenge altogether. Since a lot of the environment variables are not present on your client side and only on your server side, anytime you access the env variables constant, you'll be presented with an error because, again, the database variable, or in this case, the key variable, is not present on the client side. And there are a few other reasons as well, which you can find in the T3 env docs, which I'll be linking down below. So I'll be installing the env next.js package. And since I already have it, I don't need to install it again. Great. Once I've added that, I can simply use this single file which they've provided, provide my schema, and I can use this file, this exported const env, to access all my environment variables. Now, what do I mean by that? Now, for the server, I don't have database URL and OpenAI key. We're not building a real product yet. So the only thing that we have is a key, a single key, and it's a normal string. We don't have to provide database URL anymore. We don't even have to provide OpenAI API key anymore. Now, why is it throwing an error right now? This is because the property key is missing in type. Now, since we are using Next.js version above 13.4, currently it's, I guess, 14 point something is what we're using right now. 14.2. We can get rid of this, and what we can provide is just this simple experimental runtime env. And over here, the benefit of this is that we don't need to provide any server-side process.env variable. It will automatically be inferred from the server side, from the server key. So here, the only thing that I need to provide is the next public text. Now you can use this env inside my project, like so. Now, of course, you'll always never be actually printing out the environment variable, but just for simplicity. And similarly, in the client component, env.text. And did you look at that auto completion? That was amazing. And now if we reload our project, okay, I'm getting some error right now. So I've probably made some error in the env file, probably. Yep, right here. So I have provided the wrong environment variable over here, and that's why it's complaining. So I just need to provide it text. Now this should work. Yeah, it's working like a charm. Let's see what other features we can use from the T3 env package. So another important feature that we'll be definitely using and would love to use is the validate schema on build. Now, how can we validate the schema on build? Is by using this inside our Next.js config file. It uses this unjs.jt package, which is, I guess, runtime for TypeScript. Yeah, that's right. Now, after installing JT, we'll be exactly copying whatever's written over here. So let's go ahead and open our Next.js config file. I'll just paste whatever exactly was inside that. It is inside env. All right, let's validate if this actually works. I'll be removing I'll be commenting the next public text key, or the environment variable, the next public text environment variable, and let's give it a build. Perfect. I'm getting a build failure over here because there is no next public text that is a required environment variable for me. Let's try uncommenting it and building it again. And now I'm able to build it. And build successful. Great. Now you know how to keep your environment variables safe. And this is a definite go in every project that you're making, because setting up the wrong environment variables or using them when you're not sure whether they actually exist in your project or not can save you a lot of headache and a lot of debugging, unnecessary headache and unnecessary debugging that happens when you miss any one of the environment variables that you need for your application to run. And yeah, that's all for this video. I'll see you in the next one.